Every second of the day, your body is having millions of conversations. The brain sends instructions, the pancreas responds, the liver adjusts, muscles contract, fat cells store and release energy, the ovaries prepare for ovulation, and none of these organs work alone as they communicate constantly using tiny messengers called hormones. Think of hormones as carefully written letters. Each one carries a specific instruction. Some tell your cells to absorb sugar from your bloodstream, others prepare your body for pregnancy as a woman, some control hunger, regulate sleep, metabolism, stress, growth, or reproduction. And as long as those messages are delivered clearly, the body functions like a beautifully coordinated orchestra. But what happens when one of the most important messages starts being ignored? That is where our story begins today. Hello, health detectives. Welcome to episode 2 of the PMOS files. And today we are following the message because every symptom has a story and every story begins with a signal. So get comfortable and let's begin. Imagine you just ordered a delivery to your home. The driver arrives at your gate, calls your phone, rings the bell, knocks the door, but no one answers. The package is ready, the delivery is correct, and the messenger has done everything right. The problem isn't the message. The problem is that nobody is responding, and something very similar to this can happen inside the human body. Every time you eat carbohydrates, your digestive system breaks them down into glucose, a simple sugar that enters your bloodstream. Glucose is one of your body's main sources of energy, but it can remain in the bloodstream indefinitely as it needs to move into your cells where it can be used as fuel. Now, that's where insulin comes in. Insulin is a hormone made by the pancreas. You can think of it as the body's delivery messenger. Its job is to tell your muscle cells, fat cells, and liver cells to open their doors that energy has arrived. Most of the time, those cells respond exactly as they should. They open their doors, glucose enters, and blood sugar returns to a healthy range. But in many people with PMOS, something gradually changes. The cells don't respond as efficiently to insulin's message. It's not that they never responded at all. The issue is that they don't respond well enough, and this situation is called insulin resistance. In insulin resistance, the message is still being sent, but the receiving cells has become less responsive. Imagine trying to have a conversation with someone wearing a noise-cancelling headphone. You're speaking, they're listening, but only hearing fragments of what you're saying. So what would you do naturally? You speak louder. Your body does exactly the same thing. When the pancreas senses glucose is still remaining in the bloodstream longer than it should, it assumes the message wasn't loud enough, so it sends in more and more insulin into the bloodstream. And this situation is called hyperinsulinemia, where levels of insulin circulating the blood is higher than usual. In this case, the pancreas is working harder than ever trying to solve the problem of blood glucose still being high within the body by sending a stronger signal. At first, the extra insulin helps to keep the blood sugar in a normal range, which means many women can have significant insulin resistance for years without realizing anything is wrong. Routine blood sugar tests may still appear normal, but beneath the surface, the hidden hormone war has already begun, and while many cells are struggling to hear insulin's message, one organ is listening very carefully. Note that the problem didn't begin because the pancreas stopped making insulin. It began because many of the body's cells stopped responding to it efficiently. So to compensate, the pancreas produced more and more insulin, flooding the bloodstream with a message that kept getting louder. And while some tissues were turning the volume down, another organ was still listening. In fact, it was listening too well. That organ is the ovaries. Imagine sitting in a control room. Hundreds of phones are ringing, messages are arriving every second, and each one carries instructions. Some messages tells organs to release hormones, tell tissues to store energy when it's time to grow, repair, or reproduce. This is what your endocrine system is doing every moment of your life. It's constantly communicating. And like in any good conversation, every message is supposed to reach the right person at the right time and in the right amount. But in PMOS, one message becomes far louder than it should, and that message is insulin. Earlier on, we discovered that many of the body's cells begin responding less effectively to insulin, and to compensate, the pancreas continues to release more and more of it into the bloodstream. Now, imagine that bloodstream as a busy highway. Insulin is traveling everywhere, past the muscles, liver, fat tissues, the brain, and eventually it reaches the ovaries. While muscle cells and liver cells may become resistant to insulin, the ovaries don't always behave in the same way. In many women with PMOS, the ovaries remain surprisingly sensitive to insulin's effects. It's almost as though everyone else has stopped answering the phone, but the ovaries still pick up every call. And when they hear large amounts of insulin, they interpret it as a signal to increase the production of androgens. Now, androgens are often called male hormones, but that's only one part of the story. Women naturally produce androgen too. They are essential for normal health, contributing to bone strength, muscle function, sexual desire, and serving as a building block for other hormones. The problem isn't that women have androgens. The problem is having too much of it. One of the main ovarian cells involving in making these hormones is called the theca cells. Now, think of theca cells as tiny hormone factories. Under normal circumstances, they receive carefully balanced instructions and produce appropriate amount of androgen hormones. But when high levels of insulin repeatedly stimulate these cells, the factories begin working overtime. More androgens are produced than the body was designed to handle, and those extra hormones don't stay confined to the ovaries. They travel throughout the bloodstream, reaching organs all over the body, making the skin to produce more oil. Hair follicles on the face, chest, abdomen, or back may become more active, leading to unwanted hair growth. At the same time, hair follicles on the scalp may become more sensitive to these hormones, causing thinning or hair loss in a pattern similar to male patterned baldness. Acne may become more persistent, not because the skin is dirty, but because the hormonal environment has changed. And that's an important reminder that these symptoms are not signs of poor hygiene. They are not signs that someone isn't trying hard enough. They are biological consequences of hormonal messages that have become distorted. But insulin has another trick up its sleeve, one that makes this hormonal imbalance even more stronger. So imagine you're one huge superstar and you've organized a concert. Thousands of excited fans are waiting outside. If everyone rushes in at once, chaos follows. So you hired professional security guards, and their job is to keep everyone under control, controlling the crowd into the arena. Your bloodstream has its own version of that security team. One of the most important members of that team is a protein made by the liver called sex hormone binding globulin. It attaches to hormones like testosterone while they travel through the bloodstream. So when testosterone is safely bound to SHBG, it's much less able to enter tissues and produce effects. Think of SHBG as a protective escort. It doesn't destroy testosterone, it simply keeps it under control. Now, remember when we learned earlier that high insulin doesn't only affect the ovaries, it also affects the liver. When insulin levels remain elevated, over time the liver produces less SHBG, fewer bodyguards, less supervision, and testosterone without SHBG binded are called free testosterone. This free testosterone traveling freely throughout the bloodstream is biologically more active. Suddenly, the extra androgens being produced by the ovaries become even more powerful, not because more hormones are being made, but because fewer are being kept under control, and that's a double hit. The ovaries are producing more androgens, the liver is producing less SHBG. Together, this amplifies the hormonal imbalance, and this explains why some women experience symptoms that seem to appear gradually over months or years. Despite everything we've uncovered, one mystery remains. How do these hormonal changes stop ovulation, and why do so many tiny follicles become trapped in the ovaries? To answer that, we have to return to where every menstrual cycle begins. Every month, something extraordinary is supposed to happen inside the ovaries, okay? It's so routine that most of us rarely stop to think about it. But when you look at it closely, it's one of the most beautifully coordinated events in the female human body. At the beginning of every menstrual cycle, the brain sends a carefully timed series of hormonal signals to the ovaries, and those signals are like the opening bell of a race. Remember what we learned in the first episode of the PMOS case files, that each follicle is a tiny fluid-filled home protecting one immature egg. By the way, if you haven't seen that video, I strongly recommend you quickly watch that so you understand everything we are saying here, because they are interconnected. And inside the ovary, several tiny follicles wake up. As the day passes, those follicles begin to grow. They aren't all expected to win as they are competing, but each one is responding to hormones released by the brain, especially follicle stimulating hormone, also known as FSH. Think of FSH as the coach encouraging a team of athletes to grow, develop, and keep going. Normally, one follicle gradually pulls ahead of the others. It becomes stronger, larger, and healthier. Eventually, that single follicle reaches full maturity, and another hormone from the brain called the luteinizing hormone surges dramatically. That surge is the indication that it's time the mature follicle releases its egg, and this is when you say you're ovulating. Now, the egg being released begins its journey through the fallopian tube, while the remaining follicles quietly step aside because the race is over for that month and a winner has emerged. So let's imagine the exact same race inside a woman living with PMOS. The starting bell rings, several follicles begins to grow, the brain sends the hormonal instructions, ovaries prepare for another cycle, but something has changed as the hormonal environment surrounding those follicles is no longer balanced. Insulin is higher than it should, and androgen levels have risen. In this case, the delicate conversation between the brain and ovaries has become distorted. Instead of one healthy winner emerging, the competition stalls because they never quite finish the cross line. It's as though every runner reaches the final few meters, then freezes. Nobody wins, finishes, or ovulates, and those immature follicles remains inside the ovary cycle after cycle, month after month, until an ultrasound captures what looks like a necklace of tiny pearls lining the edge of the ovaries. Those pearls are not evidence that the ovary has failed. They are evidence that the race never reached its conclusion. They are unfinished stories, and once you understand this, the menstrual cycle suddenly makes much more sense, because if no egg is released, ovulation becomes irregular or may not happen at all. And without ovulation, menstrual cycles often become unpredictable. So some women may go months without a period, others may experience very long cycles, and some may have irregular bleeding, and others may bleed heavily after weeks or months without menstruating. Note that the period itself isn't the problem. It's the missing ovulation that came before it. This is why doctors caring for women with PMOS don't simply ask, when was your last period? They also want to know, are you ovulating? Because those are not always the same question. And now another mystery begins to make sense. If ovulation isn't happening consistently, conception naturally becomes difficult. Not because every woman with PMOS is infertile, but because releasing an egg regularly becomes less predictable, and it's one of the most misunderstood aspects of this condition. Also note that a diagnosis of PMOS is not a diagnosis of permanent infertility. Many women with PMOS conceive naturally. Others may benefit from lifestyle changes, medications that restore ovulation, or fertility treatments. So hope remains very much a part of this story. But before we close this case, there's one final mystery we need to solve, and that is, if PMOS begins with hormones, why do some women gain weight while others remain lean? Why do symptoms vary so dramatically from one woman to another? And why is this condition so different for every person who lives with it? Those answers may be the most important discoveries of all. If you've been listening carefully throughout this investigation, you may have noticed something that we've talked about: insulin, androgens, ovulation, and hormones basically. So here is a question. If the biology is the same, why doesn't every woman experience PMOS in exactly the same way? Why does Lady A struggle with mostly acne and Lady B with infertility, while other ladies gain weight, experience irregular period, and another almost none of the symptoms? Well, the answer reveals one of the most important truths, and that is there is no single PMOS story. There are millions. Imagine the human body as an orchestra. I keep using an orchestra because it simply fits this narrative very well. Every instrument has its own part to play. The violin, the piano, the drums, the flute, and together they create one piece of beautiful music. Now imagine that something goes wrong during the performance. Let's say one instrument begins playing too loudly, another starts playing too softly, and the third instrument misses its cue entirely. The music changes and it won't sound exactly the same every time they play. Why? Because different instruments are affected in different ways. PMOS works the same way. The same hormonal network is involved, but not every woman's body responds identically. For some women, insulin resistance is a dominant feature from an early age, while for others, insulin resistance is milder or develops later in life. Some women remain lean despite having PMOS, and others find that gaining weight happens easily while losing it feels like climbing a mountain. That doesn't mean one woman has real PMOS and the other doesn't. It simply reflects the incredible diversity of human biology and genetics. Scientists has identified many genes that appear to increase susceptibility to PMOS, but no single PMOS gene exists. Instead, dozens, perhaps hundreds of genetic variations may each contribute a small piece to the puzzle. Next is environmental influences such as sleep, nutrition, physical activity, stress, exposure to certain environmental chemicals, weight changes, and even lifestyle stages such as puberty or pregnancy can influence how the condition expresses itself. Think of genetics as the script for a play. The environment is the stage on which the play is performed. Now, that script may stay the same, but every performance can look different. And that's why two sisters living in the same home may both have PMOS yet experience completely different symptoms. It's why one woman may struggle with fertility while another conceives naturally. It's also why one woman's biggest challenge is acne while another is fatigue. So now you see the difference in manifestations, right? Good. Now, the biology is connected, but the journey is personal and can be different. And perhaps that's one of the greatest lessons this condition has taught us. Medicine should never reduce a woman's diagnosis. Rather, a diagnosis is the beginning of the conversation and not the end of it. When we opened this case file, we asked one question: why can one condition affect so many different parts of the body? Now we have our answer, and that's because PMOS is not a collection of unrelated symptoms. It's a network, a conversation between the brain, the pancreas, liver, ovaries, muscle, fat tissues, the skin, and countless hormones carrying messages every single second. When one important message becomes distorted, the entire conversation changes, and there's the acne, irregular period, unwanted hair growth, scalp hair thinning, weight changes, fertility challenges, etc. And they aren't separate diseases, they're just different ways the same story is being told. When many women are first diagnosed with PMOS, they begin blaming themselves. If only I exercised more frequently, if only I ate little, if only I had more discipline. But after everything we've uncovered, I hope you see your body differently now. Your body wasn't trying to work against you, neither is anything your fault. It wasn't trying to punish you, it wasn't trying to fail you. It was responding to the hormonal environment, responding to hormonal signals that had slowly fallen out of balance, and understanding that doesn't make the symptoms disappear overnight, but it does something just as important. It replaces guilt with understanding, and understanding is where better care begins. Because once you know which conversation inside the body has changed, you can finally begin learning how to unchange them or bring them back into symphony. And that's exactly where our next investigation takes us into. One of the biggest questions women ask after hearing the diagnosis: that can anything be done about it? Can those hormonal conversations be improved? Can ovulation return? Can symptoms get better? Can long-term health risk be reduced? Etc. The answer may surprise you, because despite everything we've uncovered, this story is far from over. In fact, the most hopeful chapter is only just beginning. So watch out for episode 3, where we investigate PMOS, if it can be defeated. Until then, I'll see you later, health detectives. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Love yourselves. Bye bye.